Welcome everybody back to class. This is Dr. Vargas. So last time it was we met online. It was really nice to meet everyone in the class. Really appreciated everyone showing up. I guess we were minus just one student, but it was a great meeting you all. And today let's get into some lecture content. And I do have an assignment for you as well. So. Um, so just kind of the recap last week, just sort of introductions. We'll be getting into issues regarding ethics and other managerial components of forensic science this semester. So I just wanted to, let's see if I can share the screen here and go to the syllabus. If you should be seeing the syllabus here now. If we scroll down here, we do have an assignment due next week, and that's this short writing. So I kind of wanted to just mention that for a moment. So short writing assignment, basically, I want you to scour the news, looking for cases that, and we'll talk about ethical issues today in the lecture a little bit, looking for anything in the criminal justice, forensic science world, or even research science, because we are scientists in forensic science, um, whether you can find something that has a nice sort of what you think is an ethical issue, and to basically write it up for me. And I have a little rubric here, just kind of like a generic rubric, but wanting you to do a pretty good job writing this up. And it doesn't have to be long, maybe just like one page. And basically, a brief synopsis of the article that you found, a description of what you think the main ethical issue is, and then what you think the social impact of that issue is, um, in the sort of greater context of forensic science, criminal justice, research science, and so basically you're kind of analyzing that article for me. And so, I'm just gonna let you guys do it this first time. Once you submit, I'll sort of like give you back some of my critiques on that, and that'll be an ongoing sort of point grabbing assignment for the class. So nothing too crazy. And really all it's going to do, right, is gonna make you go out there and think about issues that are happening out there in real time, and those and what you think the impact of those are moving forward for forensic science, criminal justice, and ethics, right? So let's share something else. Let's share the lecture content for today. So hopefully you can see this. This is the slides that I have for you prepared. So basically here, all I'm hoping we can just get through this really quick few slides. We'll talk about ethics and sort of more, human behavior. Next lecture, we'll talk a little bit more on like why we think people make, bad decisions even though they know better. That's kind of an interesting aspect of neuroscience even. And I am a fan of that, of the neurosciences as well. My PhD work revolved around the sort of neuroscience surrounding actually human epilepsy, although we studied it using animal models. What it's always been something of fascination for me is like how the brain works, right? And then that's actually an interesting component of how the brain works and why we think people do things that are considered to be wrong. So even if they know that it's it's wrong. So anyway, let's get into the lecture. Why are we studying ethics? I think it's important for us all to have an ethics class under our belt. Perhaps you already do from your undergraduate work, but we certainly want you to expand on that a little bit in graduate school. And so when we're thinking about ethical issues, I mean, these can exist in all sorts of, permeate all sorts of the areas of forensic science and criminal justice. And, it's just important to learn how to do the right thing. And you'd be surprised, right? Like how very often us as humans will choose the wrong thing to do, and what are the motivating factors that determine that, are some of the things we'll try to talk about in this class. And as criminal justice professionals, and forensic science professionals, it's very important that we follow a path that is not going to lead to the pain of others. And we'll talk about some epic blunders in forensic science, um, forensic science practitioners that have done the wrong thing and to the detriment of a lot of people, especially if, your data analysis that you did that was faulty could affect the outcome of somebody's like murder trial, right? I mean, so while it's easy to sort of try to separate a forensic scientist from the criminal justice, the lawyers and the policing, it really all we're all in this together as far as the field of criminal justice, forensic science being an important part of that. So some of the things that come up when we're talking about ethics for sort of criminal justice realm is this idea of discretion. And I bring this up because we're going to, your first assignment this week is to sort of read an Atlantic article by an author that's going to come to the class soon. And it's a fascinating case that I only found out about, honestly, just like last year, when the author actually came to one of our LAVA events, which is the Sunday forensic science seminar that we had going for quite some time before COVID, of course. But this idea, and so that case we'll talk about, and I'll have an assignment for you to read about it. But there's lots of places within that, and within that case in particular, where we're talking about discretion on behalf of the police officers involved, discretion on behalf of the forensic scientists involved in that case. And so what is discretion? So if you hear this term, we're basically talking about the power of authority to make a choice between two or more options, right? So discretion is, a great example that I use like for my undergrad classes when we're, just in the criminal justice realm, is like when a police officer pulls you over and maybe you're going like 5 miles over the speed limit. So you're going faster than the speed limit. Police officer pulls you over. That police officer has discretion to either issue you a warning, right? Don't do that again, kind of thing. Or they can give you a ticket because you did in fact break the law. They have you clocked at a speed above the speed limit. So if they're going by the book, you should get a ticket for that. But police officers do have discretion, meaning that they can decide not to give you the ticket, right? And that permeates a lot of areas of forensic science, right? Like legislators, policing, like I just mentioned, the attorneys and judges. Attorneys can decide to prosecute you on, all the offenses that are in the book, or just maybe one or two. Judges have discretion on like sentencing. They're going to give you. Sometimes their hands are bound by, minimum mandatories, mandatory sentencing. But in a lot of cases, judges can say, oh, you're going to get the maximum allowance by the law, or we're only going to give you 1 year for this offense. In the corrections realm as well, we won't get into that too much, but what about forensic scientists, right? So we hope that there's not going to be a lot of discretion when we're talking about our analysis in the laboratory, but you might be surprised, right? Like, oh, the extraction wasn't, perfect, but, it's good enough. It's within 20% of the, within 20% of the error that I'm going to allow for this assay. So we're going to let it go, right? But you hope there's not a ton of like discretion, because we don't want bad results. And so, when we talk about later in the semester about quality assurance and, QA, QC, so quality assurance, quality control, these are things that are kind of built into the forensic sciences to hopefully minimize the need for forensic scientists in the laboratory to use any sort of real discretion that can change dramatically outcomes, right? For the analysis. We want the analysis to be kind of standing on its own and not needing interpretation that could skew it one way or the other. However, forensic scientists spend a lot of time in the court. And in the courtroom, during testimony, there are lots of articles out there that might side with one person's view of a particular forensic science topic, and other articles that may, like, so for example, an article that may be for or against a particular claim you're trying to make in court. Okay, so there is some discretion there of the forensic scientist to, use all this literature and maybe minimize other literature. Well, of course, what the defense attorneys are going to do is prop up some of maybe the minority articles on the subject, and try to discredit the majority of the articles that are out there on a particular subject. So there is some discretion there, for the forensic scientists, I think, in the courtroom, determining how they're going to back up claims that they're making, when they're giving their testimony. Because very often, forensic scientists are asked for their opinions. Okay, a lot of the courtroom testimony is pretty dry, and just here are my results, and here's the science backing up those results. But very often, the lawyers will ask forensic scientists on the stand to give sort of like an opinion or hypotheticals, and so that does come up in the courtroom. All right. So easy to consider the discretion of police officers might have. I gave you an example of that. But what would be some ideas that you could think of that the forensic science practitioner might have discretion over? And do you think it's possible that this should even happen, or does it happen? And what would some of those examples be? So that's kind of just a thought experiment for you. Uh, but I do have this fascinating kind of story to tell you about. And again, like I said, we'll have the author coming in to talk about the case, and that's the Lazarus case, and it's the murder of this woman named Sherry Rasmussen, and you'll read more about that in this week's assignment. Okay, here's just a question for you: if something is unethical, does it also break the law? And so, um, the last 4 years of the presidency, we saw a lot of, not just me, and I'm not going to give you my, I'm not going to give you my personal political views, but a lot of people have come out, that work in like this field of ethics, right, or ethical watchdogs, especially in Washington. A lot of things that have occurred, have been, what would be considered unethical, and so does something that's unethical mean that it also breaks the law? And in fact, that doesn't always have to be the case. And so, when you are in a police agency, you will be bound by, and this should hold true as if you're a forensic scientist working in a police forensic science lab, like the LAPD, like the LA County Sheriff, you will be bound by some ethical behavior. Now, if you break your ethical code, and we'll get into some of those ethical codes that are for forensic scientists later in the semester, but if you break those ethical codes, you could lose your job, right? And because you broke the code of conduct that is supposed to be there, set in place for that field, for that position. However, doesn't mean you're going to go to jail for that. Not necessarily, right? Sort of just kind of depends. Okay, so let's see. So here we go. Um, Here's just some examples I have. These are older now, but there's a governor, and had to step down because he was giving his girlfriend, at the time, state contracts for her company, and so that was an ethics scandal. So the governor actually had to step down of Oregon. That was like in 2015. Here, this representative spent a whole lot of money transforming their office in Washington using taxpayer money to look like a show called Downton Abbey, which you probably don't know what that is, but anyway, it's a show like on PBS, I think. I don't know, but this representative had to step down because he caught a lot of flack because he spent all this taxpayer money on decorating stuff, and when people are expecting you to use taxpayer dollars wisely. Now they lost their positions in government, and maybe lost their jobs, but they're not going to jail for this sort of stuff. So you can see that breaking ethical codes can be, in some cases, detrimental to one's career, but not necessarily something that you would get put in jail for. Now, it just kind of depends on how egregious the ethical behavior is. And later in the semester, we'll talk about some forensic scientists that got in a lot of trouble because they were, creating false results, and those have major impacts on people's lives. And so when that happens, it can be a little bit more serious. Okay. All right. Um, this is just this blog that it has been chronicling that last 4 years of the presidency, and some of the ethical things that have gone by the wayside. So we saw a dramatic sort of shift in what has been accepted ethically, as far as government is involved, over the last 4 years. And so it'll be interesting to see with this new administration, you know, what we go back to, and if we can even come back to, like, you know, if something is unethical, it should be, you know, someone should, you know, pay some sort of price for that, or we're just going to let things go. And so we are in a weird flux right now of switching administrations, and all of that comes downhill. So yes, I'm talking about like the presidency, for example, but you know, all forms of government, you know, people kind of look to top positions as examples of how they should behave ethically, perhaps all the way down. And um and so, you know, there's been a big push right now for, you know, making sure people are holding to factual claims and not propagating, you know, falsehoods, because those falsehoods, in their totality, can, you know, really change people's behavior to a point where we saw, you know, crazy things happening at the Capitol, there here just a few weeks ago. So, you know, and a lot of the information that has been circulating has not been necessarily factual. And so that's a problem. And so who should be responsible for making sure we're all getting, you know, information that is valid, right? So a lot of really interesting things in ethics as a whole going on. Now, the ethical demands on public servants, and you working in a state-ran crime lab would be a public servant. I mean, you're getting paid by the public purse. Taxpayer dollars are paying for your salary, right? And we always think about the ethical demands on public servants. We do place a higher demand on those. So police officers, forensic scientists, you're considered to have a be held at a higher standard, meaning that you'll have these temptations, and it's very important for you to not act on them. Now, you imagine as a you know, police officers working in a narco unit, they'll see on a crime scene lots of drugs and money, cash, and you'd be surprised. You know, a lot of people sort of succumb to their worst behavior and will like steal stuff at crime scenes. So a big problem at crime scenes, especially ones where there's drugs and money involved, is the theft of that drugs and money by police officers. Now that's and the same thing can occur to the forensic scientist world. You know, if you're a forensic scientist and you're in control of the seized drug, or other evidence in the evidence lockers, and you have access to that, there have been documented cases of the forensic scientists going in and taking pills, money, other things, and trying to sell those things. And so that's why this is the thing we have to talk about, for you guys in your future careers as forensic scientists, because it happens. Okay. So this is actually an interesting case. You'll read a little bit more about it, but this LAPD DNA analyst Jennifer Francis discovered a suspect in an old cold case death from the 1980s, and actually discovered it was a veteran LAPD detective. And it's this crazy love triangle case that I'll have you read more about in today's assignment, this week's assignment. But she felt like she had an ethical duty to alert her supervisors, and the story that, you know, and why I'm assigning this to you is like I want to learn more about it too. I've read most of his book, and I did watch his presentation, but there's so many questions about this case that are really unanswered. And you know, it involves forensic science, it involves DNA analysis, it involves ethical duty of a forensic scientist, what they should do in a situation where they think they need to speak up. Is that appropriate? Okay. And a lot of those come up in this case, so why I want you guys to read it and be familiar with it, and see Canvas for that assignment. All right, principles of public service and ethics. Yeah, I mean, these are just really cool things to just kind of keep in mind that, you know, when you get this job, you are, maybe you won't see it as much working in a laboratory, but you are a public servant, right? You are working for the citizens. They are your customer, and so there should be accountability, leadership, respectability, and these, you know, essential principles of public service ethics that we should all sort of kind of keep in mind. And then the goal of studying ethics, and this is, you know, by Braswell, but there's many others on this subject. And what's really the most important thing is developing those critical thinking skills, being aware and open of ethical issues, and just being more personally responsible. So developing this idea of whole sight is just this idea of like, I'm thinking about things on a bigger picture. I'm becoming more personally responsible. And when I see things that I think are unethical, speaking up and doing something about it. Because there's a lot of stories from policing, forensic science included, that back in the day, and this case that I'm going to have you guys read is a great example of that. The sort of blue wall of silence is something that we talk about in policing, where it's like this code of conduct where you're always going to cover your partner's back no matter what, even if it's unethical, even if it's unlawful to do so. There's like this code, I'm not going to be a snitch, things like that sort of permeate policing. And so we'll also talk about later in the semester, uh, because that's there, and we try to minimize those things, but those issues arise. Some forensic scientist laboratories have completely detached themselves from policing organizations altogether. And Texas is a good example of that we'll highlight in the class, because they sort of centralize all their forensic scientists in a central lab that is not associated with any particular law enforcement agency. And I will tell you that there are some critics of LAPD, LA County Sheriff having their own crime labs like our building, and then those at least giving the aura to some of biases associated with policing, maybe imparting themselves on the forensic science. And of course, we don't want that to happen. And for the most part, I think we're good to go in our building, but there is those perceptions, and sometimes things do actually go wrong, and those things actually did go wrong in Texas. We'll talk about that as well. All right. So some defining terms just for this class is, well, we do see these two words often interchanged: morals and ethics. So morals is the judgment of behavior as right or wrong. And the term moral is often used as an adjective to describe a person's actions in other areas of life. While ethics is usually the study of good, is usually the study and analysis of what constitutes good or bad conduct, and more often used in sort of a professional career, like we're talking about ethics in criminal justice or ethics in forensic science, right? And then like in other professional like medicine, there's the Hippocratic Oath. That's an ethical thing for physicians. So these are often used interchangeably, but just think that morals are, sort of more on a personal level, and ethics is more of a professional thing that we're trying to describe right and wrong. Okay, duties. This is defined as required behaviors or actions, and so these are responsibilities that are attached to a specific role. For example, a police officer has a duty to serve and protect the citizenry. Uh, but for forensic scientists, your duty is to execute and perform your analysis to the best of your ability, and not to sort of doctor or skew your purposefully um, skew your results. And unfortunately, we're going to talk about some cases where people have done that. Values is defined as judgments of desirability, worth, or importance. And values can be prioritized for an individual based on their family history. I might prioritize my family over money. You may value money over 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 other things. So it's just kind of, those are sort of some defining terms. Now, examples of agency values. So for the core values of the Los Angeles Police Department, for example, these are the things that they say are their values. So it's kind of interesting. And we can look at different agencies and see what the forensic scientists agencies have listed as their core values. And that's something we'll talk about later on in the class as well. But, service to the community, reverence of the law, leadership commitments, respect for people, etc. So we'll go into some of that. There's ethical standards for some of the accrediting agencies, also the professional societies as well, that you have to sign off on when you're going to join up to, like the California Association of Criminalists or the Academy, the Forensic Science Academy, things like that. Okay, so why are certain behaviors considered criminal? Well, obviously, there's laws, and so we don't want to live in a world that's lawless So we've created laws, and and so when you break those laws, those are what, or we are considering criminal behavior. Morality is often used in determining what things should be illegal, so like prostitution, gambling, um, and so uh, and so those are humans making these decisions, and some people are for them, or some people are against them. But these are what the essential role of like the legislators and people making the laws have to sort of deal with, balancing the rights of everyone. Because some people think that gambling should be illegal, some people think it should be illegal, and that goes for lots of different areas, okay, and lots of different issues. Okay, so for something to be judged moral or immoral, there has to be some sort of uh, component of the following, right? Uh, so when you're thinking about things being moral or immoral, kind of think about whether or not there's a an act. So a human act has to be a component. So it has to be something that actually has happened, not just something you've thought about. Dog biting somebody, you can't really count that as being moral, immoral. It has to be a human action. There has to be a free will component. So somebody that has mentally handicapped or mentally ill, and they do something, we can't really condone them for being immoral or immoral, because there has to be a component of free will, and it has to affect others. And so the sort of uh, example there is when you throw rocks off of a bridge, and that doesn't hit anybody, then that doesn't necessarily become something that we can determine as moral or immoral. But if it does hit someone, then we can talk about it, because it's an act, it's a human act. You did it out of free will, and it affected others. So these are just some general ethical ideas to just have like rolling around in your brain when you're thinking about decisions that you're making, whether or not something is immoral. But also really just this idea of ethics being important. Okay, so another thing to kind of consider is, even when people know what is right and wrong, sometimes they choose to do wrong. And why is that, right? Are people fundamentally good or fundamentally bad? And so these are cool areas of criminal justice, but also just sort of like psychology, right? So criminology is this field that's trying to figure out, why people have criminal behavior, and also, psychology, mind and behavior, and psychiatry as well, when we're talking about sort of, mental disorders. So this is all of those really interesting areas that we'll talk about a little bit more next lecture. But I think it's important for us to have sort of a basis of, why people do things that are right and versus wrong. Okay, and finally we'll end on ethical issues versus dilemmas. And this is going to help you for your short writing assignments that I want you to do for the semester. Now, the ethical issue is something that I want you guys to be highlighting for your short writing assignments. And so basically, what's a difficult social question that includes controversy over right versus wrong? Now, ethical dilemma is a little bit different, because this is a situation in which it's difficult to make a decision because the right course of action is not clear or carries some negative consequences. So be thinking about these two things. Now, ethical dilemma is more personal, right? It's like, I have an ethical dilemma, and that is whether or not I should, um, whether or not I should, you know, take money from the crime scene or leave that money there from the crime scene. Okay, that's a dilemma that I have. Okay, um, that's one thing. But for the short writing assignment, look for bigger picture ideas. So the ethical issue is a bigger picture idea. Okay, so when you think about whether or not we should use DNA analysis to, uh, whether or not we should maybe use like these databases that are people doing their genealogy. You guys have probably seen this, ancestry.com. People are uploading their whole sort of genetic profiles to some of these databases that some of them are not secured. And policing has been using some of those. We caught a big serial killer here in California by using uh, people's genealogy based on their genetics that have been uploaded to these websites. And so policing and investigators have been looking at that information that's available to them, um, to find suspects. And, should that type of information be private and not used like that? Or is it totally okay to use that type of information to solve crimes? Now, that's sort of an ethical issue because, what's the right or wrong of that? You can make arguments both ways. So, those are the kind of ideas that I'm hoping you can find in your short writing assignment, but just do your best. And again, that'll be due next week. So, next Sunday evening. Okay. And I'll put a submission link for that also today. Okay, and here's just some examples of those ethical issues and dilemmas. Right, the decriminalization of drugs. We have seen that in California. We've seen that across the country. Basically, making holding a small amount of drug not be as much of a crime as it used to be. That's a big picture ethical issue because some people think maybe you shouldn't have any cocaine on you no matter what, but we're seeing in California and other states, hey, if you want to hold some, psilocybin, so some magic mushrooms, then they're going to let you do that now in some states, right? But and not be criminalized for that. Is that a good or bad? A dilemma would be whether or not you should actually personally use a drug or not. That's a dilemma for you. That's not what I'm really going for the assignment, but sort of more big picture ideas. So here, everything in this left column here are sort of the big picture things to kind of think about. And those would be the sort of things I'm looking for the assignment. All right. All right. So I guess that we're good on that. Hopefully you guys saw the slides. I'll have to play this back before I upload it, but hopefully that lecture worked out all right. It's just a real quick lecture. Get your guys thinking about ethics, and hopefully you enjoy the assignment and the reading for this week. It's a really interesting case, and really just be thinking. I actually put a blatant question in your assignment, thinking about some questions that you might have for this author when he comes and visits our lecture soon. And so he'll be zooming in with us soon, and I'll put that on the syllabus and update it when I have a finalized date. All right. Thanks so much for watching, you guys. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you on the next one.